Hello and welcome to the Miles Zen podcast. I'm so glad you're here with us today. We have a truly fascinating guest joining us from Geneva, Switzerland, my friend Helen Alderson. Helen's journey spans more than 35 years in the humanitarian sector, global public health, and sustainable investing. Most of her career was with the International Committee of the Red Cross, where she served on the executive board, navigating financial and reputational risks in an ever-changing and often volatile environment. From visiting prisons on the ground to shaping decisions at the highest levels, Helen has seen the full spectrum of humanitarian work. She's also led the World Heart Federation as their chief executive officer and has contributed her expertise across numerous boards. What makes Helen's story so compelling is not just the breadth of her career, but the wisdom, humanity, and grace which she reflects on the choices she's made and the places she's lived. In this conversation, you'll hear insights from someone who truly embodies what it means to be a global citizen. It's inspiring, it's joyful, and yes, we laugh along the way. Whether you've ever wondered what a career in international organizations looks like, or you're simply curious about how one person's journey can touch so many corners of the world, this episode will resonate. I can't wait for you to hear Helen's perspectives. Let's dive in. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We first met in, I think, August 2000. We were both signed up to do an MBA at the University of Geneva. Let me just say, Helen was the one that had her act together. All the students in the MBA class were like,
I'm not sure that is true.
If we don't know what we're doing, we're going to ask Helen. Helen has had this magnificent career through a lot of time with the International Red Cross and then with the World Heart Federation. And now she's busy doing consulting and sitting on boards. And I think the world is really lucky to get some of your experience and your much wisdom gained from all these different roles that you've had. But I want to bring it back to your English. You grew up in Switzerland, so you're technically, anybody would think of you as more Swiss. Do you think of yourself as more English or more Swiss?
Probably more English. So my parents are English, both of them, but I was born in Geneva. And then, like at the time, they did what English people did anyway at the time, was they sent me and my sister off to boarding school in the UK. When for me, I was 10 years old. So it was a bit young, too young. So I was at school between the ages of 10 and 18 in the UK, and then did university here, and then traveled a bit. But sort of culturally, I guess I'm more English, but Geneva's my home, and that's where I feel very much at home. And Switzerland is, there are places in Switzerland which feels like a foreign country to me. I don't speak German or
Yeah.
Italian, sadly, but I feel a bit of both. I feel from Geneva while still being English.
I absolutely loved my time living in Switzerland, and I was there for about 6 years. And Geneva is a bit of an anomaly in that I think half the population of Geneva are considered foreigners.
Yeah, so I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but you can find them. I think something like 70% of people in Geneva are of sort of like foreign origin.
Yeah.
So, because there was a lot of immigration as well, and then a lot of the international organizations, big trading companies, and so on. So, my father worked for an American company, Cargill, which had its headquarters in Geneva.
And so I do remember you talking about you wouldn't send your children to boarding school. So
You remember that? Yeah.
yeah, but that feels like just what people did. And
It's what people, it's what English people did at the time.
yeah,
Yeah, they did. That's my mother went to boarding school, so for her it was quite normal. And they traveled a bit. so they wanted me to have a sort of continued education. And that's why you don't find English schools around the world. You find French schools all around the world.
Right.
You
Yeah.
find American schools all around the world. And the IB wasn't really much of a thing then. That's the reason why, is because they all put their kids off on a boat somewhere and send them back to the UK, even if they lived very far away.
And so you had your sister was with you.
She was, and it wasn't very far. So my parents came over probably about once a month, and I had cousins and my grandmother lived in the UK, not very close to where I was, but I could like for half term and stuff like that. I went to see her, so it wasn't as bad as for some people. But
I
I was
know.
very homesick. I was very homesick, especially the first like I don't know about the first 5 or 6 years.
Oh, I
I
mean, for
was
a
I was homesick.
10-year-old, I can imagine. And I'm guessing you were a shy kid.
Bit shy, yeah, yeah, a little bit.
So then after you finished your schooling there in the UK, then what did you do?
Then I spent a year in Paris just to get sort of my French back again because I'd been to primary school in French. And then I did university in Geneva,
What did you study then?
political science and international studies.
I think we're the same person, Helen, except for you've had this amazing, amazing, illustrious career. And I didn't, but I swear to God, we studied the same thing. I studied political science in Paris, actually, and French, but I spent only a year there, and but I did my undergrad here in
Yeah.
UBC, and and then
In politics as well. You did
yeah,
political
political
science in
science.
undergrad. Yeah.
Yeah, political science with a focus on international relations because I
There we go.
I wanted to be a trade commissioner, an ambassador, and
Mhm.
that was my plan going into university. And then
Interesting.
when I actually got my internship at the Center for Human Rights at the UN, which is why I moved to Geneva in the first place, I met all these people and I started to rethink what I wanted to do when I grew up. So, what did you think you wanted to do when you grew up, when you started
So
university?
it's funny because I had thought, like you, for a little while anyway, about the diplomatic service. So I'm dual national, but to be a Swiss diplomat, you have to speak at least the Swiss languages, which I only spoke one of the three. So it would have been a diplomatic career with the UK Foreign Office,
Yeah.
and I wasn't particularly sure I wanted to represent the UK, or at the time anyway. I think I'd been probably traumatized by boarding school. I didn't really want to go back to the UK either. So, I mean, Geneva is the center of the humanitarian organizations, and that was fairly quickly what I wanted to do. And the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is a very Swiss organ, I mean, it's very international, but at the time they only, if you wanted to go out and be what they call a delegate, and you had to be Swiss. You had to have a Swiss passport. So that was like an obvious choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you finished school and what happened? You got a job right away or
So yeah, but not. I applied for a job with the International Committee of the Red Cross, so ICRC, and they came back and said I need to get some more experience,
that's funnily enough, that's at the
which
UN
is yeah,
exactly what they said to me. They
yeah.
yeah, they were like, come back in 10 years with a master's degree and more experience. And
Ah, okay, yeah.
but
So that's what you have to do, right?
yeah, and then I had somebody else tell me that well, it was actually there was the Tunisian Post guy who would come by to me and he would say, Shannon, get out, get out. You Canadians and you Swedes, you're too honest for this system. You've got to get out. And then I worked for a Japanese guy and he was like, Shannon, you're going to pick up too many bad habits here. Get out, then come back in 10 years with a master's degree and more experience.
Ah,
And okay,
he
so this
suddenly disappeared.
did I ever? Do you want to know the culprit of why I disappeared? It's this guy right here.
Oh, hi. Somebody
Yes,
stepped on a button or something.
somebody did exactly that.
Oh, look at you. Yeah.
Oh, that made me laugh. He may have been called a few names. Oh, that's funny. This cat, I tell you, I've covered up the button now.
Okay, so he can't disturb us anymore.
He
Okay.
can't turn off. Oh, he can certainly disturb us, but he's adding a little je ne sais quoi to our conversation. Like, does this face look like a face that would stop a podcast midstream?
Amazing eyes. Amazing eyes.
Yeah, he's got his look.
Green eyes. He's got green eyes closing his
Yeah,
green
there.
eyes.
Yeah, he's a handsome devil. Yeah, we always say at least he's got his looks.
He's got his looks. I'm sure he's smart as well. Not sure.
Yeah, yeah, the jury is still out on that there, kitty cat. So where were, oh yes, so we were talking about the UN and my one of my bosses who was Japanese told me I needed to go out and get more experience and not pick up the bad
Mhm.
habits.
Yeah.
And then so you were told to go away, get some experience.
Exactly. Yeah. So like you. So I worked for an NGO for a while in Paris, and then I got a job in with UNICEF in Chad when there was the big famine. You remember the Ethiopia
Yeah,
famine and all of
yeah.
that, and yeah. So off I went to Chad, which was a bit of a shock.
Well, I can't even
But
imagine. Well, how does that even happen? Like how does that come up and then you decide I'm moving to Chad?
because the NGO that I was working with, we had a project that was funded by UNICEF
Oh, okay.
in Somalia, in fact. And then, so yeah, one thing led to another, and the head of the emergency desk for UNICEF in Geneva sort of rang me up in November saying, would you be interested in coming to Chad for 6 months with UNICEF? And but you'd have to leave like in 2 weeks. And so yeah, so that's what I did. And then came back to the ICRC saying I've got a bit of experience, and but that's how they took me.
Okay.
That was good.
So what were some of your favorite times with the committee of the Red Cross?
So, well, I was very lucky because I really wanted to go to Asia, in fact. And first of all, they said, oh, there are less jobs in Asia, unlikely and so on. But in the end, yes, I did. I went to Thailand to work on the border with Cambodia in the refugee camps. And then I went to the Philippines just after the revolution that toppled Marcos. And then came back to Thailand again. So just spending 3 years in Southeast Asia was amazing. And I got to travel around the countries around there. So yeah, there was some, I don't know, lots of great experiences, lots of great stuff. In the Philippines, we were visiting prisons. It's a country of thousands of islands. So we went to for weeks, and the weekends we'd spend on these amazing beaches. And then once I did spend a night in prison, and I had a birthday in prison as well, where the prisoners cooked for me. That was probably one of my favorite experiences.
Wow.
We were in the main prison, and there was a low security section that we were visiting with people, these old guys who'd been in prison for like 30 years, but were now had been moved into like a low security setting where they could cook and they had stuff like that. And they found out it was my birthday, so they said that I had to stay for lunch, and they made me lunch, and that was kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And so why did you stay overnight in the prison in the first place?
So this because we were very. It took us about 8 or 9. This was a different prison. It was like a work colony. So it was on one of the remote islands, and it took us so long to get there that by the time we got there, it was evening, and we needed to do the prison visit,
Okay.
which takes about a day or two. And so the prison warden said, "Well, you should just stay." So not
Right.
not in the cell, thankfully. We stayed in his house on the
Okay. Yeah,
to the prison.
one of my
It was
uncles, I
nice.
was in and out of prisons all around the world, and I'm sure in Southeast Asia as
Okay.
well, but I suspect he had quite a different visit than you did.
Yeah.
Quite
So,
and so what were you guys
so,
doing there?
in visiting prisons is a typical activity of the ICRC. It started with visits of prisoners of war, as there are some very strict rules, international convention on how prisoners of war should live and be treated and so on. And then this extends to political prisoners and so
Right.
on. So so in the Philippines, it was actually, it was an interesting time because they were it was when Cory Aquino came to power, so just after the dictatorship. So they were releasing people from prisons, but often they were like rearresting them afterwards or not releasing them as they should. So when we visit prisons, they have to let us visit the whole of the prison. We have to be able to have individual talks with prisoners without witness, so without anybody surveying us, and then to be able to go back whenever we want to visit the prisoners to make sure that, they weren't sort of leading us astray, and that we should be able to visit the whole of anywhere in the prison. There's no place that we're not allowed to visit. So we did this I've done quite a lot. So in the Philippines in particular, all around the Philippines. I worked also in Kuwait, where we were also visiting. At the time, it was after the first Gulf War, so they were releasing prisoners of war, bringing them back to Kuwait from Iraq, but also the Kuwaitis were then arresting a lot of people who were perceived as having been on the wrong side during the war, and then they were just expelled from the country. So we were visiting them in the places of detention. And then in Israel, I visited prisons as well. So
Oh,
Palestinian and Lebanese detainees. So that's what we did.
yeah, that's a really full time. So what were some of your other activities that you did during those early years with the Red Cross?
So I did. So on the Thai-Cambodian border, the work I was doing was reuniting, finding family members who disappeared or not disappeared, where they'd lost contact because of the political situation. So in Cambodia, if you remember, it was a country that was completely closed
Yeah,
between 1975 and 1979 during the Khmer Rouge regime, where about a third of the population was killed.
yeah.
And so I was working in the camps. It was 7 years afterwards, but there were people who had still had no news of their family members. And the country itself was still quite closed. And so I was working there when it was beginning to be opened up. And we were able to, yeah, to bring into contact again people who'd lost touch with their close family members and had no clue whether they were still alive or where they were 8 or 9 years later. And we did the same, and then we were able to have family reunions again where they were,
Oh,
for example, you have big communities in Canada, the US, from Southeast Asia, France, Australia. And when they find close family members, then quite often they're able to emigrate to be reunited with them. So I did a lot of that kind of work, and in Vietnam as well, with the boat people who'd left Vietnam and they had no and again, Vietnam was opening up at the time, and there were no contacts really between or official contacts, or it was very difficult for people to have contacts with their family members who were still in Vietnam, and that was beginning to open up. And the Red Cross was a sort of a neutral, acceptable way for them to be in contact. We did this at the time also between mainland China and Taiwan. There was no possibility for family members to contact each other. So they did it through Red Cross messages via our office in Hong Kong.
oh wow.
And then afterward, now it's possible. Now they can, write to each other. It's much easier to do, but at the time that wasn't possible. So it was opening up these kinds of doors to enable families to be in touch
Well,
with each other.
that's
So that was very gratifying. That was very
yeah.
gratifying. I like
I
that.
mean, that feels like a really great day at work when you when you get to do that, and that's
Yeah,
really meaningful work.
we did a lot of work with the Canadian Red Cross as well, who were very active in this space
And
because you're an
so
immigrant country of immigrants.
so did it feel pretty like high stress when you were in it, or because you've got your community of friends that you've made with your colleagues and you're all, working for a higher cause that kind of mitigates some of the stress?
Uh, I mean, high stress. I mean, some places are higher stress than others. I found Israel pretty stressful. Um, but yeah, it's interesting because a lot of in organizations like ours, people you find often people are more stressed out and get burned out when they're at headquarters because they're actually once removed from the actual impact
Yeah.
of the work that you're able to do. And so bureaucracy creates much greater stress than actually out in the fields and doing work in difficult situations. But I was never in working directly in places that was sort of still at war.
Right.
So, which a lot of my colleagues are, like if they're in Ukraine today or in Sudan, Gaza right now, it's quite different to the places that I was working in. Yeah.
And then how did you get to that next stage where you ended up back in Geneva?
So, well, Geneva's the headquarters. So it's like when you're a diplomat, you go back to Ottawa.
Yeah, yeah. So is that what
It's the
happened?
same.
You'd go into the field and then you'd come back to Geneva and you'd go out
So
into the
I
field
came
back
back,
to Geneva.
yeah, exactly, and came back to Geneva and then worked in Geneva for a while. And I did a lot of work also then in sort of resource mobilization and fundraising. So we get the ICRC got its money, 90% of its money from governments.
Yeah.
So I worked in that for a while. I went to Ottawa a few times. And then by that time I got married and I had kids and we went back to the field, well, to Israel for 2 years as a family, when the children were little, which was really interesting. It was a better time then than it was now, I'd say.
Yeah.
Um, and and then came back and met you, did an MBA, and so that's when we met. And I didn't then afterwards want to go back, to have to do this backwards and forwards travel because for family reasons. So
Yeah.
then I left the ICRC and I worked for a little while for a socially responsible investment fund, which was
Yeah.
interesting, but not really, not my thing. And so then I joined the World Heart Federation, which is a federation that brings together societies of cardiology and heart associations, heart foundations around the world. So it's public health.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you
And their headquarters in Geneva.
you started there at a pretty high level. So when you left the Red Cross, what had been your last job there?
So it was working in Israel as deputy head of delegation.
Okay.
And then I did a 1 year project on the fundraising strategy of the organization.
Right. And then when you were
Yeah.
at World Heart Foundation, you were the chief operating officer and director of development, and then you moved into the CEO role.
Yeah. And then I moved into the CEO role. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we always knew you were CEO potential for sure. You were
Oh,
CEO
thank you.
material,
Thank you.
Helen. Yes, being the one that had their act together in the MBA. All of our close buddies would attest. I'm going to send this podcast to them and they'll be like,
Oh
yep,
my God.
Helen.
Yeah, so that was fun. It was very interesting. It was, I'd say that the challenging bits were like managing the board because there are all these cardiologists who think very highly of themselves. And so, in fact, when I interviewed when I first joined, I had an interview with the president, who was a very well-known, actually British cardiologist at the time, and he was kind of nice because he could make fun of himself, and he said you just have to, managing cardiologists is a bit difficult because there's a difference between God and cardiologists, and the difference is that God realizes he's not a cardiologist, and it's a bit true. But there were some really good people who, because it brought together the public health and side of things with the foundations, and then it had the clinical side of things, which was the Society of Cardiologists and so on. It was quite a diverse community, and it was very international. There were some amazing people who I met and who were on the board, and there are some people who it was very difficult to work with.
Yes, yes. Well, nothing prepares you to work with difficult people like I'm sure some of your experience that you had going into prisons and such. And I gotta say, group work, school group work no
Yes.
matter how painful that is, it shows you how to work with all different types of people.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But that
And
was no, that was I enjoyed that. Yeah.
yeah, that and you know what's so funny is I think in all organizations, it's that board management and also boss management. But in that case, for people starting out in their careers, boards are often tough. And managing up is a thing that you learn how to do.
Absolutely a thing. It's a thing. And if you can do it, it's quite powerful. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes me think of that movie. I think it's My Big Fat Greek Wedding. And the
Yeah.
woman's like, your father may be the head of the family, but I'm the neck. The neck turns the head.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. That's a
Yeah.
good one. So yeah, so I worked for the World Heart Federation for 8 years, I think. And then I went back to the ICRC in the leadership team.
Yeah.
So which there was one job I said I'll go back for, and it was that one. So I was overseeing finance, fundraising, and logistics. And thanks to my MBA, I knew a little bit more about finance than I did before I did the MBA.
And then you became head of delegation in the UK.
In the exact, yeah. So we have term limits at the leadership team. So it's 2 terms, and then 2 terms for 4 years. And then I went as my last job before official retirement as head of delegation to the UK, which was nice because it was like it's a little bit full circle. I was coming back to the
Yeah.
UK, different UK from the one I grew up in for sure, very different UK. And yeah, I love the kids out of the home then. One of them was still studying, the other one had started working, and so it was nice. I really love London. It was fun being in London, and it was just a very interesting job. It was more like policy work, and the UK is sort of a big centre for think tanks and on development and humanitarian work and that kind of thing, and then working with big donors, governments, and we had amazing access to Parliament, and I was able to meet people like Boris Johnson, go to the diplomatic party at Buckingham Palace, and fun,
Oh,
glitzy stuff like that, but also proper work.
well, that it does sound fun. So what were some of your other really memorable moments from that time? I guess moments where you're like, I am definitely in the right spot. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, some of us, like I
Yeah,
did my MBA because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I was like, well, I'm going to do the MBA because then I get to get insight into all these different areas across a business. And maybe that will give me some ideas. But, you know, you've had such a purpose-driven career. And I imagine that there's moments that you're like, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And was that in London? Did you have a lot of those moments?
I'm not sure I necessarily really thought about it in that way. Because also, like when you take on a job or when you take on for me, it was always important to think. Also, when I applied to come back to ICRC and so on, is I I know I could do this.
Right, right.
Even though you feel a bit imposter syndrome in any case at points, regular points in my life. I did anyway. But it's just this is something that I know I can do and that I really want to do. And so having that job in London was the same as well. But I guess yeah. To your question, I this is where I should be is also because I did politics at A level in the UK. It was and all this stuff was coming back to me like like how it all worked. And when I
Right.
arrived there, I had the team saying it was briefing me. Well, this is how it works. It was saying, so I know, I've done this. I've visited Parliament when I was at school, things like that. So I think, yeah, times when I was working I mean, going to Parliament, which is an amazing place, and talking to the parliamentary committees who were working like on development or defense and foreign affairs. It was just I thought was just amazing. And then also we did a lot of work with the British Defence Forces, with the military,
Yeah.
who The world's military gets trained in the US and the UK. Well, the Western world's military gets trained in the US and the UK. Well, more than that, I mean, a lot of, all across Asia as well. So Central Asia, Africa, they all go to defense colleges in the US and in the UK. So to be able to, yeah, to go and do some really interesting work with them. And I was very impressed with those are people I think most impressive were the military because they've really thought things through and they know what they're doing. Politicians don't always know what they're doing, but the civil servants in general know what they're doing, and they're good in the UK, high caliber. So I mean, I had a lot of contact with the military in places like Israel, but beyond that, not so much. But in the UK, yeah, very interesting work.
Yeah, and so maybe just to paint the picture a little bit of why they would have so much knowledge and know what they're doing. I think because when you're removed from certain things, then you make assumptions about what goes on in different militaries. And I was just listening to an
Hmm.
interview with Brene Brown, and she said her
Hmm.
her analogy around courage, you can't have courage without vulnerability, came from
Without fear.
yeah, a
Hmm.
fellow in the military.
For
And then
sure.
she built on that. And so what's your take on that?
Yeah,
On
no, for sure. But because I think for the military, because they take training so seriously, they're always, always, always training and continually training. They also have, which I was probably a bit sort of less expecting, they put a lot of attention on like pastoral care. So mental health, pastoral care, looking after families. They put people in I mean, like special forces, the kind of places they go to. There are issues. There have been issues about the way that special forces, been out in the press in Australia and in the UK, behaved in Afghanistan, some of the things that they did, and then the way that they then deal with that. So I think that is what is very impressive, in particular.
yeah, I mean, you've just been exposed to so many different things. And it's just like you've crammed all these experiences into it feels like a very short few years. I mean, it was a couple decades worth, but when you look back, well, the joy of getting older is time seems to speed up. And those two
It does,
decades,
huh?
in some cases, the days were long, but the years are short. And and so you've had this really unique perspective of being out in the field, but then being at headquarters and headquarters in different countries as well. And what are some of the things that you've observed that help people become really successful in terms of, like, I think of you are successful if you are mentally, physically healthy. You've got,
Hmm. Hmm.
some strong relationships. If you don't have your health, all the money in the world is not going to help you. But
No, no.
and so I think of like people who are really happy with their situation and with their lots in life, or that they've chosen, or in some cases not chosen. Is there anything that just jumps out at you as what were the characteristics that made those people that way?
There are other maybe um, things like being curious, wanting to learn. And I think today, when I look at the younger generation, like my kids, so they're their very early 30s, they realize that they're going to have to, and they want to carry on learning all the time and all their life. But I come from a generation where it's just like, well, you finish studying and then you get a job and then you're like, you don't need to learn stuff anymore. And even doing the MBA, it was interesting. I had some people, colleagues saying to me, why are you doing that? What's the point? Don't you know all that stuff? For sure I didn't. And for me, the MBA was also, it was great to be. I mean, it was a real privilege. We were like in a little bubble for a year where
It
we
was
could
amazing.
focus. For those of us that did it full time, we had
Yeah.
some friends who were doing it while working at the same time, which is more complicated to juggle. But I was learning so much new stuff. And it was a new experience and being with people from completely different fields of work than I'd ever worked in. So I think there's this thing about wanting to continue to learn and being curious and not thinking, oh, I'm here and I've made it, and looking at what the
You're not a
opportunities are.
cardiologist after all.
Not exactly, not a cardiologist after all. So I think there's that because I mean I'm very lucky. I was born in Switzerland. I didn't have any big problems to face as I was growing up. When you see people who come from today, we have a neighbor she's from Ukraine. She learned yesterday her brother had been killed on the front, 32 years old. So you think, gosh, we're very lucky.
Yeah,
We're very fortunate. I mean, I'm very fortunate to be living in a place like Geneva, or you're in a place like Vancouver. When you think
yeah,
of some like my children's age, when they have to go off and fight for their country.
yeah,
In Europe today, it's not sort of some distant memory,
yeah,
distant past.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I think it's also taking opportunities, wanting to learn, being curious. I never had a sort of a grand design or a particular and things came along. I mean, I knew when I wanted to change jobs or that kind of thing. And then when you're looking for new jobs, it's a mixture between luck and being well prepared, that kind of thing. But it's
yeah,
true, being healthy. I mean, you know, having your social network, sleeping well, eating well, being able to do other activities. I'm a bit of a workaholic, so that was sometimes I had to make sure that I wasn't spending too much time on that.
yeah. That can get hard. I've spent time nibbling in and out of that. Certainly in my last role, it was a role
Hmm.
that you didn't leave at the office, but in your roles, I don't know how you could be head of a delegation for the Committee of the Red Cross and not take that home. That feels like a job that it becomes who you are. And then so then what happens when you put that job away, because I imagine, did that job become your identity, or was Helen apart from that job and apart from the Red Cross?
It does a bit, but I'm quite good at letting go.
Oh, amazing.
I can do that. So I think that's also important. It's true. It wasn't a job I left at the office, I think, ever. Um, but for me, I was also looking forward to retirement, to working
Right.
less. So yeah, there are things I miss, there are things I definitely don't miss.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. So it was not so difficult to let go. People say you need to prepare retirement and stuff like that. Well, I didn't because I didn't have time. It's just like, well, I'll do that. And then, then things happen and I never had time. And so I had about 6 months. We moved back to Geneva. We traveled. We did all sorts of stuff. And then January arrived, and it was dark, and it was cold,
Oh, and
and it
foggy,
was quite and foggy in
foggy in
Geneva,
Geneva.
like it can get. Yeah. So but it took. So I think it took me probably about 2 years. So I stopped work 3 years ago. It's 3 and a bit years ago. It took me probably about 18 months to 2 years to find it was a different I wanted a different balance. And
Yeah.
somebody said to me, which I found quite useful, I haven't really done it in a very disciplined way, but sort of setting objectives. So there's like the intellectual stimulation, because I was so focused on that. So I needed to sort of find how I was going to manage to do that. Then there's health. And there's sport. So as you know, I play golf. So this is a big part of my retirement. And when I like, oh my goodness, what can I do today? Well, at least there's always golf. Golf is there. And golf is also about so then there's the social aspect.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
physical activity, mental activity, health, and then social. So having more time to see people, to spend time. I have a 91-year-old mum who's here and she's still in
Okay.
good health. So spending more time with her and so on. So I felt that was useful. It was just the balance was going to be very different, which was good. And then I took a while to sort of find what kind of work. So, consultancy or board work and not jumping on the first thing that came along. And then things sort of happen. They do or they don't, but it doesn't matter so much. It's not
Yeah.
the end of the world if I don't find something that I really want to do.
Right. Right. And so, do you have any advice for people who are trucking along through their careers or through life in general when you get thrown any setbacks? And did you experience any setbacks that you're like, oh, well, this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
tough?
lots. So, no, lots. And I think I mean, one thing is that nothing is ever permanent, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
change is
yeah.
hard.
So whether it's setbacks at work or setbacks in your personal life interferes then with how available you are in your mind to work. I think nothing is permanent, and I think then it's a question of putting things into perspective as well, and then understanding what can you do about it, because there are things that you can control and there are things that you can sort of try and influence, and there's some things you can do absolutely nothing about
Yeah.
and not trying to. I've done the 8-week MBSR mindfulness course, and
Oh,
I
nice.
don't practice as much as I should now. I have more time, but that for me was very, very important. It's part of the health is mindfulness practice and knowing that things aren't permanent and not trying to overinterpret and react to everything that sort of gets thrown at you.
Yeah. Do you wish that you had done that earlier, or is this
Yeah,
something you
sure.
recommend for everybody? This mindfulness
It's,
training?
things work for different people differently, but I don't regret very much, really. But for sure, when I started to do it and started to really focus on it, it made a huge difference. It really helped.
Yeah, that's a good reminder because it can be hard to develop a mindfulness practice.
Yeah, it is. But that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, right. I think that's some things are hard and that's just the way it is. And you get through
Yeah,
it. And
yeah,
yeah, I love that. It could be a country song actually, but just comes to mind is that when you're going through hell, for goodness sake, don't stop.
exactly. It's a good one.
I think we've had a lovely conversation, and I like to leave our listeners with some additional words of wisdom that through your career and your life thus far, what are some words of wisdom that you would pass on to somebody?
So I hesitate a bit because I think also I've done quite a lot of mentoring in mentorship programs, and the environment has completely changed from when I was leaving school or leaving uni or changing jobs or whatever. It's very different today. So I think the way I managed it would not necessarily be particularly relevant today. But I think it's really just continue learning, always have your eyes out for interesting things and interesting opportunities and never just not being complacent. I think that's the thing. And managing expectations. People say, oh, there's so much turmoil and companies are forever restructuring and that kind of thing. Well, yeah, but there's not going to be any stability. It's not going to sort of suddenly become stable or calm again. I
Yeah,
think that's a myth.
yeah,
So what's helpful is being able to manage that, being adaptable, managing this adaptability, focusing on how to be resilient as well. And I think letting go is a really important thing to be able to do, whether it's, relationships that are difficult or, yeah, or leaving work, or if something you get made redundant, or if your friends get made redundant, or if you're having difficulty managing, balancing home life and work life. And they're not two separate things, I think. Less so today, having us all gone through COVID. You can't separate them completely. It's just how you manage them that's important. And listen
yeah.
to more Brene Brown. That's what I would advise.
Yeah, and it's funny because now I've created a life now post my job where it's all very merged, what I would call my work life and my life. And so none of it really feels like work. Okay, maybe the odd life admin feels a little worky to me, but in
Mhm.
general it doesn't. But it certainly did, and it certainly has at times. And that ability to let go. I mean, that's such a good reminder of, like, even when somebody stares at you funny in the office or gets you in trouble for something, or you get told off by a cardiologist on the board because you haven't done this, that, or the other, to not hold on to that, because that
Yeah,
stress lodges in your body and it doesn't do any good for anybody.
yeah. Okay.
And I think of you, you were always the voice of reason in our MBA class, and always, one of the first ones to be able to laugh as well, right? You didn't take yourself too seriously, but you came to the table with a lot of value. And I think that's what makes really wonderful leaders. And what I've observed to you is you bring a lot of value, but you bring a lot of humanity and ease the way you show up.
Oh, that's very kind. And it's important. Well, it's important to us have fun,
Yeah.
at the workplace, and because otherwise, it can all become a bit too much.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that even when you're doing these jobs that can be really heavy, is that what you would make sure with your colleagues, that you can still have fun and still be able to experience joy in some of these
Yeah,
heavy
for sure.
moments?
For sure. Yeah.
Like a birthday party, a birthday dinner in a prison, not something that comes to mind, but you brought
No.
joy into that
Well,
into
they
that
brought me they
experience.
brought me joy. That was the
Yeah, they
best
brought
part.
you
They brought me
joy.
joy. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Anything else you'd like to share?
Well, look, thank you. And I think also what you're doing is great because you talk about bringing value. This is what you're doing. So a wide audience. Yeah.
I want to be able to provide information to people so they can think perhaps a little bit differently or approach things with a
Yeah.
new perspective. Some stuff is going to be right out of the box for some people, and generally, want people to feel good when they're approaching life, that there's choices that you can make, and sometimes it's hard, but just keep taking action, and there's always some beauty to be found somewhere, even if it is
Yeah,
that little
exactly.
flower growing out of the concrete. And when you start
Yeah.
looking for it, it starts to show up.
So true.
Thank you so much, Helen. That
Great.
was
Well, look,
great.
thank you. Thank you. It was great. I enjoyed that. I
And
can see your cats. I can't see your cat anymore. I saw a tail
oh,
every now and again.
he's still here. So from Soda Pop and I, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for all our listeners who've joined into Miles to Zen podcast today. And we'll see you all next week.
Thanks a lot, Shannon. Bye bye.